Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in this Charleston virtual conference session. Really excited to facilitate the conversation that we have for you today. My name is Melissa Fulkerson. I'm the VP of Reference Solutions with Elsevier, so I look after our STEM reference content and the products that support that. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about reference content and books and the role of books and libraries in higher education. And so the purpose of this conversation and this session that we've pulled together today is really to talk about that topic and how libraries and librarians can influence student success and the missions of institutions at large and the students that are coming through to learn and hopefully go on to be great citizens in the future. We've pulled together a great panel today. We're going to have a nice discussion. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we will be off and running. So I'm going to start with Marcus, if you can share who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Melissa. My name is Marcus Elmore. I am the Access Services Librarian for the Colorado Community College System. Just this year, we have gone to a shared electronic resource model for 15 libraries among 13 colleges making up this system. So we share a suite of subscription databases and other electronic resources that are then content of which is then made available through the individual college libraries. And I try to keep the whole thing running.
Try. The operative term is try, right?
Exactly.
Amy, how about you?
Hello, my name is Amy Pulowski. I'm the Executive Director of OhioLink, which is the consortium of academic libraries across the state of Ohio. In OhioLink, I think most of you know, but we facilitate resource sharing amongst our print resources, but also do group purchasing for ebooks, journals, and databases.
Awesome. And last but not least, Diane.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Harnish. I am a senior consultant with Delta Think, consultancy here outside of Philadelphia. We focus on scholarly communications, scholarly publishing. I've been in the scholarly publishing world for about 30 years, predominantly working in the realm of anything that's not a journal. So books are right up my alley. I also have had a deep specialization in education, really from undergraduate up through professional development. So, and had the pleasure of working with Melissa on a recent research study in this area around student success.
Excellent. Thanks to the three of you. And that's a great segue, Diane. So I wanted to actually start with you. So obviously, over the last few years, as our libraries have had to transition through hybrid and kind of offsite learning and moving or off-campus learning and moving to online instruction, course instruction for students, there's been a lot of change in the way that students access materials and kind of the way that we communicate with them and facilitate learning. I'm curious what you can share from your perspective on what has the research told us around the role of libraries or how that really has changed in terms of how we're impacting undergraduate students.
Sure, absolutely. And I think the big headline in the research is that books or book-based content, as the content formats have been evolving, is still very alive and well and used instrumentally within the course-based education. Not surprisingly, at the undergraduate level, those broad survey courses, the textbooks are still really instrumental in scaffolding those courses. But the work that we were focused on within the study that we did with you and your team was really around how are those reference books being used, the ones that are out in the big library collections. And the research really showed, we did surveys, we did some deep interviews across the personas with faculty, with administration, and with our librarians. And it really does indicate that at the graduate level in particular, books, referential titles are very much valued, very much used as part of the overall mix of titles that are being used. Certainly the journals are also very instrumental there. And what did the faculty in particular really, what are they looking for in these resources, these book-based resources? As they commented to us that the books serve as a important foundation of knowledge, They've kind of just level sets. This is the field, this is the topic, this is what my students should know. They also feel that it's very authoritative in that they're looking for authoritative titles that really do level set that foundation. But they're also looking for practical application of the knowledge. And encapsulated in and wrapped within that kind of overview of the foundation as well. So, and then the research also told us that the librarian and the library overall is instrumental. They are an enabler of student success. Increasingly, faculty reported to us as well that they must, either they do it themselves or their institution really requires them to look more and more at what holdings the library does have. We want to set our students up for success by providing them access to the resources they need to be successful. So it's important for them to have those resources at their disposal, the access of that through their libraries. So that the librarian is very important in ensuring that those collections really reflect the course mix and the resources that the faculty are needing to set their students up for success.
That's great. I love that, the use of that term, enabling success. And I think the ongoing conversation around demonstrating the value of the library within an institution really solidifies that is still a really thriving and really required resource. Amy, does that kind of raise any reflections for you in terms of, is it possible to measure the impact that you're having, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, so again, that enablement there, and what's happening in Ohio. OhioLink is running our affordable learning initiative, in which we talk a lot about our librarians working with faculty members on their campus to identify course resources that are not textbooks. So it might be something coming out of one of the electronic resources that we have, the ebooks we procure, the journals we procure, but also OER materials or open educational resources as well. And what we find is that we're getting faculty using a mix. So they're using some things that are copyrighted that they have to use in the appropriate way, but also to meet different course objectives, they're finding online resources, OER resources that are free, but also library resources that can fill that gap too. And Diana, I'm happy you mentioned that, because I think in the past, what has been frustrating for a lot of libraries is that we've had these materials and it was just really hard for faculty to understand or know, or to go and talk to their librarians about what is on the shelves and how they can help. And that seems to be changing and turning over, which is extremely exciting for us. And we are definitely seeing more engagement on the faculty side with helping to identify these resources.
That's great. Marcus, is that resonating with you as well in the community college system?
Yeah, I mean, I can identify two challenges that the Colorado community college system faces, and I would assume is true of other community colleges. One is that a difference in the type of resources that are required for teaching community college introductory level courses. And that would be, format agnostic. The same challenge would be true in building a print collection, but for an online collection, journal literature is necessary, especially in science and health fields. But to return to what Amy said, quite often you need those resources, like a given journal article will often be so specific, so specialized, and presume a foundational level of knowledge that if you take a first-year nursing student and only offer them the journal literature, it's going to present learning difficulties. So as we built a online collection that was journal databases, but also ebooks and other resources that attempted to serve the entire range of subjects taught in the community college system, and that would be accessible to all four. We've got 100,000 students, 40,000 FTE enrollment. So trying to meet the needs of all the programs and all the students, that the distinctions between that traditionally exist between reference materials, monographic materials, journal literature, it's in a lot of ways doesn't make particular sense in a contemporary community college setting. And so, for instance, one thing I've noticed is that I used to work in a physical community college library. We had a large reference collection that simply never got consulted, or was consulted only when the librarians took the students physically over to the reference section and said, here are some good resources. But when, for instance, when students are searching a collection using a discovery service, my sense is that they're not paying attention to the distinctions between types of literature. And so our electronic reference resources are being used much more than, for instance, than print reference resources are. And I think that's helpful, right? That kind of leveling effect. Students are finding the information they need maybe through a centralized mechanism, but without these without attention to what traditionally have been different formats.
Has that changed how you think about collection development, though? Because it sounds like you're still trying to serve many, many, many different diverse user types.
Yeah.
I think, and having access makes it easier to find, but how does that change kind of, traditional issue, budget and that kind of thing?
Right, exactly. Well, one of the challenges that we face in our situation, given the constraints we're working with, is a reliance of necessity on subscription packages, right? We just don't have, we have neither the bandwidth nor the budget to build a collection at the title level. But when you're building collection for an entire system and you're relying on packages, there are going to be lacunae that appear, and individual ebook title acquisition has been our solution to that, right? When a hole in the collection becomes apparent through use, then quite often the solution is to acquire one or more ebook titles that will fill that hole, address that gap in the collection.
Great. So you've got to stay vigilant in tracking.
Yes, exactly. And we're only in our first year, so this is very much work in process.
Great. Amy, what about from your side? How are you're obviously a large statewide system trying to serve multiple different types of institutions?
Right. Yeah. So traditionally, when OhioLink is procuring an electronic resource package, we're picking up a complete front list titles, of ebooks or packages. But going to the how has collection development changed? I was thinking through what we did over the pandemic, because I think that really did start swinging how our libraries, at least, were thinking about collection development, and slightly shifting from what was prior, supporting materials into kind of supplemental materials. So we're seeing this little bit of a shift, facilitated, I think, by some funds. So, the federal dollars, state dollars were coming in. But we received some at OhioLink, and it was, we're going to pick titles or try to pick items that we think faculty could utilize within courses, so our students didn't see this crazy uptick in costs over the pandemic. We didn't know how long it was going to be, and so how we decided to pick those resources was very different than just picking up what seems like the best supporting front list title. So we went, we went from support to kind of a supplement move. That doesn't mean that we're still not buying materials that support the courses that our institutions are offering, but we're thinking about it slightly different.
How do you know if it's working?
That's a fantastic question. For us right now, it's anecdotal, and to some extent, right? So an example of some work we've been doing with our affordable learning project. Anna Bendo, our director of affordable learning, every semester runs what we call an OER mini grant program. And faculty members apply for these mini grants, they get a small stipend, and over the course of a semester, they work on identifying OER materials or library materials to match each of their course objectives, with the end result being the least amount of money students paying out of pocket for resources for their courses. That we've done that through 3 or 4 semesters now, and we are doing a survey on the back end of that, and it is extremely successful. We go back and do ask questions of the faculty member. Have you implemented this? What are you hearing from your students? And so far, we're hearing a lot less problems with retention, which I think we all know is, if students don't have to pay extra for those materials, there's a better success rate for retention through that course, but also faculty members, A, being surprised that the library had as much as they had, and B, the partnership that they've built, both with OhioLink and then moving forward with their libraries on campus. So somewhat anecdotal, somewhat not, as far as numbers there.
If I can jump in, I think your point, Amy, is so important. You know, access to the materials that students need is a prime metric or prime ingredient of success. And having those resources at the beginning of the course, having, just taking some of the other experiential, research and observation I've had over the years, when the traditional adoption model is alive and well, meaning the purchaser of a resource is the student, what we saw for years is a delay in the student actually buying the resource for any number of reasons. Practicality, they couldn't get to the bookstore, or their delivery didn't get there from their online bookstore. They were testing the waters to see if the faculty was actually going to use the resources that they said were required. Right. And some of very core, the practicality of the finances. I worked with faculty years ago where it was an online product as well, where we gave complimentary access for the first 2 weeks because you had students in a community college system, Marcus, that was waiting for their financial aid to come in. So access to these resources is absolutely instrumental. We saw that in the research across all the focus we did with Melissa's team, again, was across all of STM. So it's not just in the health sciences, it's not just in engineering, it's across all of these areas that we looked at. So access is a fundamental, and there's been a number of different external groups that have researched this as well, and access will even predicate how many classes a student takes in any given semester. If they have to put out their own personal funds for the resources, they're apt to take less courses simply because of the financial situation. So access really is an important element of getting them started on the right track from the first day of classes.
Absolutely, Diane. I mean, everything you just said resonates with my experience with working with community college students in Colorado. We face an additional challenge in that the online instruction in the Colorado Community College system includes home college sections where an instructor teaches students online from their home college, but also pooled sections where an instructor at one college may have students from a variety of colleges as students in their class. The credits will go back to the student's home college, but one of the rationales for having a shared electronic library was that students needed to be ensured that they had access to materials, but also federal law requires that students be informed at the time of enrollment what the costs of course materials are. And if you don't yet know what section you're going to be in, it requires that all the pooled sections use the same resources, both textbooks or OER materials, but also library resources. And so what we've done in Colorado is have state discipline chairs consult with their faculty and then select for each course a material that must be used so that the students can be aware at the time of enrollment what the cost of the materials are.
And would it be expected that it would be in the library collection, or is it still you're making choices?
Yeah, at this point, I feel like it's still kind of an even mix between traditional, like a ebook version of a textbook, quite often with course integration, from probably from one of the big textbook publishers, library materials or OER materials. We do have a designation for zero textbook cost courses. So students can actually, when they're enrolling, can actually filter by and select courses where there are no course material costs associated with that particular section of that course. But I think at this point, it's still a work in process, right? It's still settling out. We also have an OER initiative. We're experiencing some success, but of course, as everybody recognizes, what varies widely from discipline to discipline, what materials are available and how readily the faculty are willing to adopt them as the primary teaching materials.
It strikes me that that's just as much of a change management project.
Absolutely. Yeah. In many cases, it's, if you work with faculty on OER materials, they come away pleased and shocked at what is out there. But other times they come away shocked and dismayed.
It's definitely,
nothing.
it's definitely subject specific, right?
Yes,
So,
exactly.
you start looking at OER materials and some subjects have a great amount of resources and others, there's still some work to be done.
Yeah. Well, and then when in a community college system where you start getting into these trade or industry subjects, mortuary science, right? There,
Yep.
as far as I'm aware, there is no OER material available for mortuary science, and yet students need to be educated in that field if we're going to have practicing morticians in the future.
Right. Oh, Mark, this brings up so Ohio is getting in the Intel semiconductor plant, actually kind of in the Columbus area, and Intel is working with a group of our institutions on making sure that there's coursework created that students can take to make sure that we're preparing them for the work or the type of workers they're going to need inside these plants. And it ranges, as you mentioned, Marcus, down to learning how to put a bunny suit on, all the way up into, semiconductor creation and high intensive research. So thinking about how are we as a state working towards finding those resources is something we're absolutely trying to deal with and tackle right now.
Right. And it's a great opportunity, right? Because many of the skilled trades, instruction has traditionally not been book reliant, right?
Yeah,
Automotive
absolutely.
mechanics, welding, plumbing, electricians. A lot of the training has been hands-on. The classroom materials have not been book-based. And so the library has, at least in Colorado, the community college libraries have supported the vocational or trades education, but in different ways, right? Because Trinidad State College has one of the few gunsmithing programs in a higher education setting, and they're just the published literature on gunsmithing is just not that deep. So gunsmiths have traditionally been trained using other sorts of materials, pamphlets from manufacturers, training videos. So then when you get around to building an online collection, then that presents difficulties, right? Because the materials are either proprietary and with a direct subscription model, or maybe, the librarian at Trinidad State College right now is working on a archive of digitized materials from out of print and out of copyright gunsmithing.
And Marcus, that really, sparks for me some of the other, research that we're doing and working outside of some of the more mainstream, course areas. That you're exactly right. We've learned this as well, where again, faculty, if it's, mortuary science or wastewater treatment or whatever it may be, these are, again, we're leaning into faculty and really appreciating that books have that foundational knowledge of practical application, but there's also all kinds of other content that they're looking for as well. You might be videos, and so your collections must be looking very different these days, as well as not everything sits in your broad collection base. Some of it may be with a society or with a trade organization that is the authority in that element. And so thinking about that for the folks that might listen in is, when you're thinking about being a content provider, it's really understanding what's the digital rights management elements that you need to be thinking about, so those faculty can use your content the way they need to ingest them into their course materials. Their accessibility, meaning, do you have all those elements of the ADA requirements that do come to the surface more and more, as well as discoverability. And this is one of the things that I was talking to some of your librarian colleagues on, another recent opportunity, and these are critical, because if you can't make these elements discoverable, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to have that one-to-one relationship with each one of your faculty. So there's an element of making sure the search works so that they know what's available within your collections as well. So, I think that there's some things that have also come to the surface with some of the work we've done recently, is digital rights, accessibility, as well as discoverability is really, really critical, especially when you start to get into those kind of one-off content needs that might be for a specific type of course. They're just as important to make sure you have the content accessible to the students.
Right. And all of that is layered on top of some long-term, there's long-term stability in higher education in this country, in the sense that for 100 years we've been working on a basic model. Even a community college is bootstrapping off the tradition of 4-year and graduate education. My sense is that change is on the horizon, and libraries, I think, are in a unusual position in being inheritors of a lot of assumptions about higher education and how it works, right? The book model, the journal model, the reference collection model, but also of necessity, we're going to be at or near the center of some really disruptive change in the future. And that is going to be difficult, but it's also going to provide opportunities for, for new approaches to education and new ways of empowering successful students.
Well said, Marcus.
That sounds like a perfect way to cap this conversation. I mean, it just reflecting on what you guys have been talking about, it strikes me that it feels like we're at sort of the beginning of a journey in kind of reshaping what the library's role is in student success. Really, I think, at least in my view, I think we think a lot about researchers and what materials they need, but I think there's so much opportunity, and some of the early data showing that access to materials really can have an impact on retention and things of that nature. I think the more we can mature, I think we're probably not quite there yet with demonstrating, grade improvements and things of that nature, but hopefully we can get there in the coming years as the relationships between your faculty members and the librarians continue to gel, and everybody's sort of working in a harmonious direction. Awesome. Any final thoughts before we cap off this, and we'll switch to the live Q&A?
No.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. This was an awesome discussion. I'm hopeful that our listeners will have gotten a lot out of it, and we'll close the recording here and then switch over to the live Q&A. Take care.
Thanks so much.